How's it, everybody? Welcome back to the Rocky Fern. Today we're doing another episode of In the Shop, and this week we are working with a really old piece of African tulip wood. African tulip is very lightweight. It's a white grain. It is an invasive species. This was cut down at a park nearby a few years ago, and I just went and picked up a big old, massive cookie. That was probably, 6 feet in diameter maybe, and about 2 feet thick. But because it's such a lightweight wood, I was able to pick up that whole piece by myself. Talk about feeding the complex there. But I was able to put it in the truck, get it home, and split it up. And it does have some spalting going on, but I have some cool ideas to use with this piece. I'm going to turn it into a really pretty vase for a coworker of mine, and we're going to dye it. It doesn't have very particular grain that's kind of nice to look at, but it takes a stain really, really well. And so we're going to do that. Join along and let's see what we can turn out. Alright, we're going to take the roughing gouge and just get as much turned away as possible. This wood is very, very light, and so it does leave a lot of tear out. It's not very fun to work with, but I had a giant piece that I could make a giant piece of, a giant vase out of rather, and thought why not. And it does take a stain very, very nicely. So this is me just mostly getting roughly cylindrical on it. These are all fresh tools I'm using, and you can see it's just all chips. There's no ribbons coming off of this, so it's a very punky wood. Alright, so I have been thinking about this, and I think I've got an idea if I can pull it off. It's nothing complicated, just, putting it to reality is going to be difficult, I think, for me. But I'm thinking of doing a beaded base, coming up to a nice round body, coming up to another little bead, and then having a nice long sweeping neck that comes out and flares out to the top of the vase. So pretty narrow in here, bead, come out to a nice cylindrical body, bead on the bottom. The other tricky part is I have to leave enough material on so that I can finalize it with sanding, because this wood leaves major tear outs. Easy to sand, but of course everything gets smaller when you sand it, so I gotta make it clunky and then finesse with the sanding. So that's what I plan on doing. So let's get to it. Okay, so we are running into some issues here. This is now my 4th coat of sanding sealer, and it just sucks it up like a sponge. It is incredible how much this thing is slurping up this sanding sealer. So I am gonna probably keep applying it another few coats in hopes of saving the wood as it is, even though we are gonna stain it. Just because like this part right in here is super spongy, like you can push on it and it gives. But in the meantime, why don't we go out in the field and check out African tulips and their ecological impact they have here in the islands. All right, so there's no denying it. Obviously, they have beautiful flowers. Spatholodia comes from the spathe-like spadix that is at the base of these flowers here. The flowers are campanulata. They're bell-shaped, so Spatholodia campanulata. We take off, and Hawaii has a ton of these African tulips everywhere, and it's from these seed pods, and they're just packed full of these seeds that have very great ability to travel in the wind. The wood itself is not very good wood. It's very soft, but it's also very fire resistant. And here's a good example here of trees being able to be seen fully leafed and fully de-leafed, and they're both equally healthy side by side in a big field here. We're going to get an overview here of, you can see all those seed pods, probably millions of seeds, to be honest with you, that have already dehisced and are ripening. Just big umbels of flowers, beautiful flowers. They have a nice orange tinge to them, to a fiery red base layer. The trees can get up to probably 100 feet tall. Typically we see them here in the 30 to 70 foot range. Just beautiful flowers. They just spread incredibly well. I mentioned earlier in the video that they're the top 100 most invasive plants, and they also come in this kind of orange color, so this is near my house and it's kind of cool to see. But pretty invasive plant. Kind of glad we can take it down and turn something with it. All right, welcome back to the shop. It has dried, the sanding sealer, and so now I'm going to take a real thin layer off so that I can sand it, not gum up my sanding pads, and then we will get to dyeing it. You can see here I'm using a block to help kind of keep the surface even, but it sands up really nice. This wood does sand up really nice. These are just resin dyes, alcohol based, that I'm cutting with more alcohol, and I was trying to figure out how I wanted to kind of transition color to color, and of course I had to make my own colors to do the complete rainbow here. I ended up going back and doing a very heavy saturation of the color, and that actually was a good call. It ended up being a very nice end result, but the wood just sucks up as much resin, or excuse me, as much color as I could give it. But the transition ended up working really well. I like that I was able to blotch it into the next color, and it wasn't this really clear demarcation from color to color. It was a nice transition. And then I ended up flicking some of the darker pigment accidentally, but I liked the look, so you'll see here that I ended up flicking a bunch of dark pigment throughout the piece and kind of gave it this speckled look. And I really did like this. I was very pleased with the way this thing looked prior to trying to finish it. There were some hiccups in the end, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but the color, the saturation, the transition, everything I was really pleased with. Alright, to get into the center of this, I just take a dowel and I cut a little slit in it and then slide in some sanding paper, and that does such a good job at getting in there. And I just work through the grits and sand it out, and of course it's very easy to do, especially with this dowel. And I end up taking the dowel and using it for another thing. I thought if I burnished the wood, it would help with the grain, since it's such an open pore, open grain wood. So I am just taking this dowel and I'm burnishing the wood, and it gives a really nice surface that I think lent well to the initial finish. Now here in the islands we are having a bit of a shellac shortage, and so that's what forced me to use a different finish. I ended up going with a tabletop finish. So you can see that it's mostly shellac there, but it just kept sucking it up, and I ran out of shellac. There's a shortage, so I ended up having to switch gears. Alas, this is Hawaii. But there's my logo, and we'll wrap it up here and talk about what happened. Alright guys, so here is the finished vase, and while it has been a roller coaster, I was able to somehow pull out I'm not going to call it a win, but we were successful in completing it. So I did put a tabletop epoxy on this, and we had a wicked windstorm, and it got blown over. Even though it was inside my like dust box, it got blown over, so I ended up having dried epoxy just hanging off of this big strand, so it ruined the finish. You can see the bottom didn't get affected, other than it didn't level correctly. I don't know if I can get that on there, but the rest, oh my gosh, I had to resand by hand, file, and kind of spray on another type of finish. So this was salvaged. It does look pretty decent. Let me try to show this off here. The color saturation did darken up quite a bit, but here it is, final shape, final end piece, made out of the African tulip wood. And it didn't turn out quite as vibrant and as flawless as I wanted to, so that drives me nuts, but it does also look pretty good. So here it is. We knocked it out. Hopefully you enjoyed the footage. Got some nice drone footage. Yeah, anyway, join us next week. I think for sure we're going to be doing the remake of the toothpick box out of that really nice koa. And until then, we'll see you guys on the next adventure.